for the Chicago Bears, Phil's Chicago Bears. And on the 29th, we have a meetup in New York City for Transformation Kitchen, which is Chasen's organization, and he's teaming up with Peter Shaler in Nicaragua. And then he's going to go to Nicaragua and he's going to set up a Transformation Kitchen in Nicaragua, which is so cool. So we've got a great group showing up in New York City to support those guys. We are hoping and praying that Chris Schember's voice comes back, because right now he has zero voice. And he's going to speak at our event in New York. So we're really excited about it. But it doesn't get much more exciting than having Jenn Drummond in the house, does it? Oh my God. Where do you start? Like, I'm not even going to give the bio, because the bio, we're going to go through a lot of that just in some of the questions. So for anyone who happens to be new, I don't see anybody that's new on the call, but who knows, I'm not over on the other page. We do like a 30-30 format. So I'm going to talk to Jenn for about 30 minutes, fireside chat, just shooting some questions at her. And then we open it up for live Q&A. So if you've got a question for Jenn, just put in the chat, just say I have a question. You don't have to write it out. And then Kathy will let me know, and I will tee you up with the one and only Jenn Drummond. So without any further ado, Kathy Love, get us started. I can't hear it. I don't know. No sound.
I don't know. It's pretty.
It's the theme to Monday Night Football. So if anyone wants to
the sound kind of makes it.
Or hum it. Jenn, you know, a little maybe technical difficulties, but whatever. You got the point. We're you here, so thanks for joining us.
I'm excited to be here, so thank you for the opportunity.
I have so many questions, but let's talk about what's maybe your impressive achievement, which is you have 7 freaking kids.
I do.
What?
Yeah. Yeah.
Crazy.
So there's a story with that, for sure.
Let's hear it.
I was struggling with fertility issues. And, you know, every month you're reminded of a failure because it doesn't show up the way you want it to. And so I went to a doctor to help with that scenario, and then still continued to struggle for an additional approximately 2 years. And then finally, the doctor came up with a chemical cocktail that turned me into a hen, because I had no eggs, and all of a sudden I had 28 eggs. So I don't know how else you classify that, but then those 28 eggs were put in Petri dishes, became 14 embryos. They planted 2 embryos. I had my son Jack. And then I got a bill from the fertility clinic. I'm like, I'm sorry, that's not mine. I've already paid you guys umpteen tons of money. There's no way. And they're like, well, these are your embryos on ice. I'm like, okay, well, let's go through what that is again. And so with embryos in the state of Michigan, every state's different. You either use them, donate them, or destroy them. And I'm like, well, I'm not going to destroy them. It took me years to have this child, and I want karma to bite me in the buns. Like, no way. And then I grew up with Dr. Seuss, right? So that book, Are You My Mom? Are You My Mom? I didn't want that story to be like, are you my kid? Are you my kid? Are you my kid? So I'm just going to use them, and whatever is supposed to happen, I'm going to have faith that that's what the story is supposed to be. and 14 embryos turned into 7 children.
Unbelievable. Age range of?
Yes, 18 is my oldest, and then I have twin 12-year-old daughters that are my youngest. So I have 5 boys first, and then twin girls to end it.
Unbelievable. Are them interested in climbing?
I took my 3 oldest to Kilimanjaro. So I took them, and they each brought a friend, and we climbed Kilimanjaro last year. And that was a great experience. When my younger ones get a little bit older, they want to go too. So I'll probably take them. Other than that, they've done stuff locally. Like my daughter was really worried about me climbing and dying. And so I took all the kids ice climbing, and I took them all climbing so they could see, hey, I'm tied up to a rope, and here's what's going on. And these are the things that we do to make it safe, so that she didn't have that fear anymore. So they've all been exposed to it, just not to the extremes.
Very, very interesting. What's your best parenting advice?
Get in the arena with them and whatever they're interested in. You know, so I have 7 kids that are entirely different and very different from me too. And so one of them is a DJ. Like he can feel music. I can only hear music, but I sit there and I try to feel it with them. I have another son that is a mechanic. Like that's just his brain. So he likes to take things apart. So I get to be the tool belt, and I'm really like, okay, what tool do you need? And how does this work? And show me what you're doing. So it's very much whatever they're interested in, get in there with them, because that's when you get to have conversations and it allows them to teach you something. And so then when you come back and teach them something, they know what it feels like to listen and to be heard.
Mm-hmm. I love how you always talk about be where your feet are too. And that, you know, because you've got a business and you speak and you climb mountains and you're a mom and you know, different things, you know, sometimes I think we're all guilty of, you know, we might physically be there, but our brain is somewhere else. And I think, you know, you talk about it a lot. Being where your feet are is super important. So when you're with them, you're fully present.
I'm fully present, and I'm very structured. And, you know, when you have a whole bunch going on, you have to be structured. So when you have a whole bunch of kids, like it forces structure, which then actually gives you freedom. So on Sundays, I'll look at the calendar and be, where am I going to get an hour with each kid? And I'm sure everybody listening is like, only an hour. But that's a very intentional space held, you and I, an hour time. And it's amazing how connected you are, where like I have a sister who's a stay-at-home mom. Because she's home all the time, she's always doing laundry or she's always doing something else instead of just being with them. And for those of us that have multiple like constraints in our time, that presence is really where you can close the gap on how much quantity versus quality.
So let's go to 2018. 2018, you get into a horrific car accident. And I don't know if anyone's ever seen the pictures of the car. It's like, wow.
Maybe I can pull them up.
I guess walk us through that. And then obviously that was a big transformational point for you. Yeah, can you guys see that? Yeah, it's crazy.
It was crazy. It was because, you know, I think life happens for us, not to us. And for me, like, truth be told, I grew up in West Michigan. And West Michigan, like, your dream was to be a stay-at-home mom. Like, that's like the Kool-Aid that I drank growing up. And so I had started a business. And when I started having kids, I started hiring myself out of that job so that I could be stay-at-home mom with my kids. Well, then when the kids got a little bit older and I found out some stuff about their dad's extracurricular activities, I decided that we were going to move to a new state and would get a new start and not have that follow us around. And so he's like, anywhere that's a direct flight is fine by me. So I moved them to Utah because he lived in Detroit. And so as Salt Lake to Detroit is a Delta hub. So when I moved to Utah and I was a stay-at-home mom, like my first semester in Utah was a dream because we transferred in January. So when you transfer in January, you can't be the PTA mom, you can't coach soccer, you can't do any of these activities because they've already been selected. So I put everybody in school, and all of a sudden I had time to myself to like play and explore, and just like, it was amazing. Of course, by the fall, because you have 7 kids, you're in a system so fast. I'm coaching soccer, I'm running Sunday school, I'm doing all the things again. And I just was like kind of disappointed in myself, putting myself in the same position that I'd always been in. And I just remember thinking, when my kids get to college, then I'll be able to do me. This is just the season I'm in, and just grin and bear it, and let's get through it. Well, that holiday party at Thanksgiving, there was another mom that was running the classroom party with me. And she was one of those Pinterest moms. And I love that we have Pinterest moms in this world. It's not me. So this mom shows up to the classroom with a sweater and a hair tie that matched hers that had like feathers on it. And she's like, hey, I got this for you so we can run this classroom together. And I remember like going into the bathroom and putting this turkey feathery thing on, like fighting back tears, wondering what decisions I made in my life that put me into this spot. And I'm just like, what is wrong with me? Like, why am I this human? And then I remember I'm like, okay, well, again, I'm just selling myself. Like, once they go to college, then I can do me. This is just the season of feathers, I guess. I don't know. And I got in that car accident. And when I got in that car accident, like anytime you're in these like crazy near-death experiences, time dilates. So I'm watching the car come into play with the semi truck. And when I'm watching this happen, I'm dilating time and I'm having a conversation. And the conversation I'm having is, if I'm allowed to live, I promise I'll do something significant with my life and I'll no longer put it on hold. And I just remember thinking, okay, the only way I'm going to survive this accident is if I let go. And my story before that accident was like, when something got hard, I was going to like double down and vice grip it, and I would go harder, and that's how I would win. And I had been reading the book, The Surrender Experiment. So I understood the concept, but to me, it still sounded like a little woo-woo, like who surrenders and wins? Like, that's baloney. And then this accident happens. I'm like, you know what? The only way I'm going to survive is if I surrender. Like, what's the irony here? And so I do all the flips and survive the car accident or whatever. And when I got home to my house, which was the same day, I remember walking in the front door, seeing pizza on the counter, kids on rollerblades indoors, 2 of them bickering about something, and like tears flooded my face, grateful for this mess that was mine. And then Christmas was the next week. And I was the mom before that. When Christmas was going on, I would follow my kids with like a garbage bag. I'd be like, okay, we're going to pick all this up and everything's going to be clean and organized. And that's mom. And this Christmas, my kids are like, Mom, there's like paper all over the floor. I'm like, I know. And I'm just I love watching your little fingers like open the paper and rip the things and be so shocked of what you got each other. And I just am in the moments, and I'm not organizing them or managing them anymore. I'm just experiencing them. And they're like, okay. And so then after Christmas, I had a State of a Union. When you have as many kids as I do, you have to call meetings. And I had a meeting. I'm like, hey guys, Mom was in this horrific car crash. They didn't really get it, right? They like saw I got a new car 2 days later or whatever. And I am going to do life different. I'm going to start doing me, because my life is just as important as your life. And if there's something I'm doing that feels off or wrong or whatever, like, we're going to just talk about it. But Mom before was just going through the motions, and Mom now knows she's supposed to do more than that. And they're looking at me like, okay, sounds good. And so then we started making like bucket lists, like all of us. What do you want to see or do or experience before you die? And so it was a project we were all doing. And then on that list was climb a mountain, and like things unfolded from there.
So you had never, I think, slept in a tent before.
Right.
And so how in the world, Jenn, do you go from not sleeping in a tent to deciding to climb the second highest summits on 7 continents.
Yeah.
And explain how you chose to do that, which is, become a world record.
Yeah. So on my bucket list, I had climb a mountain. We live in Park City. There's mountains all around. I'm like, I'm going to climb a mountain, like a real one someday. And so at the end of 2019, which was the year of the bucket list, I realized in 2020, I was turning 40. I'm like, okay, so I'm looking at my list of things that I wanted to see, do, or experience before I die. And I'm like, you know what? Climbing a mountain is only going to get harder. So I'm going to climb a mountain for my 40th birthday and launch this next decade and have this be like the thing that launches it. And I asked some friends, like, if you could climb one mountain in the whole world, what would you climb? And some of my mountaineering buddies were like, climb Ama de Blanc. I'm like, Ama de Blanc? They're like, yeah, it's this stunning mountain on the way to Everest. It's beautiful. It's the Paramount Pictures logo. So every time you go to a movie, you could tell your kids you climb that mountain and all those things. I'm like, okay, cool. I'm going to train for Ama de Blanc. Well, in the beginning of 2020, if we rewind back, there's this little thing called COVID that entered the scene. And so now I'm homeschooling 7 children, and I'm really not training for any mountains because no one's traveling anywhere. And one day my little guy was struggling with his math homework. So I did what we do with those like parent pep talks. Like, we do hard things. Do your math. We'll go outside afterwards. And this little guy goes to me, if we do hard things, why are you climbing a mountain called I'm a Dumb Blonde instead of a real mountain like Mount Everest? And I'm like, I'm a dumb blonde. Ama de Blanc, honey, not I'm a dumb blonde, but thank you. Finish your homework and we'll look at Everest, and like, that's how it started. So then he finished his homework. We looked at Everest. He went to bed. And I said, if this kid thinks Everest is the hardest mountain in the whole world, I'm going to climb it. And I'm going to show him whatever Everest is, we're capable of summiting. Ama de Blanc's harder than Everest, but people don't know this, right? And so it was like his perception is what matters. And so I'm going to satisfy his perception. So when I'm going to train for Everest, like, I have to call a coach. So I call a coach and I said, hey, here's my background. I'm going to train. He's like, yes, I can get you ready. Buy this book about becoming an uphill athlete. I'm like, okay, fine. So I buy this book about becoming an uphill athlete. And in the front of it is a story of a lady who got a Guinness World Record. And when I'm having a call with my coach one day, I'm like, if I got a Guinness World Record, I'd be the coolest mom in the whole world, because homeschooling, I am not cool. And my kids learned how to read on Guinness World Record books. They don't care about anything else, but they love to know who grew the biggest, pumpkin, or how many hot dogs someone ate, or, like kid things. And so my coach is like, okay, I'll think of something. Don't worry. I'm like, okay, fine. And it was kind of like in passing. And then a couple of weeks later, he calls me. He's like, Jen, I have the perfect world record for you. I'm like, oh yeah, okay, yeah, what? He's like, I think you should be the first woman to climb the 7-second summits. I'm like, I don't know what you just said. What? He's like, the second summits. I'm like, well, why would I want to climb the second summits instead of the highest summits? Like, who does the seconds? He's like, well, the seconds are actually harder than the first. And they've only been done by one male. So you'd be the first woman to climb these mountains. And he goes, if you think about it, 7 continents, 7 mountains, 7 children, it's a jackpot. And I'm like, it is, but you do remember we haven't done the tent thing yet, right? Like, I still need to figure that piece out. He's like, oh, don't worry. Those are details. We'll get through that.
Unbelievable. What was the experience like? Everest. So there are others that are more challenging, and I'm going to ask you about K2 in a bit. What was that experience like when you reached the summit
of Everest? Yeah.
Yes.
So Everest is like I know everybody has a different experience. Everest for me was a fun climb. It was so fun because, one, my biggest fear of Everest was being away from home for so long. And so I slept in this altitude tent at home. So I was only gone for 3 weeks instead of the standard 8, which made a big difference, because then you're not like eating that food and you're not sleeping in a tent. Like that just gets wearing on you at some level. My kids' school was involved. So I had a tracking device on me. So the kids were tracking me where I was going. and you have Wi-Fi at Everest Base Camp. So like I could Zoom call home and talk to the kids or talk to the classrooms or all this kind of stuff. So like I was very connected still on Everest. And you have people from all over the world trying to achieve this one thing. And the interesting thing about Everest, that it is so dialed in that the only thing I need to do is get up and walk. Someone has the oxygen covered, the food covered, the tents covered. They tell you if you're hiking, they tell you if you're not hiking. Like they literally do everything for you. And so as a mom who is used to doing like, do you have your lunch packed? Is this going on? Like I'm logistics central and then the business and everything else. Like Everest was a breeze. I mean, you're telling me I don't have to worry about me? Like really? That's like, like amazing. And so we had a great experience on Everest because we had good weather. Just everything fell into place.
So let's flip it over to K2. So for the people that don't know, K2 is probably one of the scariest mountains to climb. So you guys might remember when we had Colin O'Brady on. So Colin has 11 world records and he's climbed Everest multiple times. And he tried to climb K2 in the season where like nobody climbs it.
Yeah.
And he was like, it was horrific.
Yeah.
Horrific.
Yeah.
That one took you 2 times, which is not insignificant based on the chances that something bad could happen. Tell everybody about that experience climbing K2.
Yeah. So K2, so my experiences on mountains up to here have been these like happy experiences, right? Like everybody's summited, the weather's been great, like everything's been safe, blah, 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 blah. So I'm amazed no one's done this thing yet. Like what? Like this is fun. Like this is amazing. Well, K2, 25% of the people that climb K2 die in its pursuit. And when you're climbing K2, it's like playing Frogger, because it just drops rocks and ice and everything the entire time you're climbing. I mean, I cracked 3 helmets. So it's just crazy because all of a sudden stuff's falling out of the sky while you're trying to scramble up this mountain that requires climbing. When you do Everest, it's just your feet. When you do K2, there's climbing sections. So you are climbing with your arms and all the different pieces. So my first attempt at K2 was in 2021. I was coming off a high of Everest and feeling quite confident. And then an avalanche took out one of my teammates. And then it broke one of my teammates' legs. It killed a teammate. And then it kept another teammate stuck on the mountain for the entire day because a helicopter couldn't go in and rescue because the blades of the helicopter would vibrate another avalanche and could bury this person. So you read about this stuff, but when it happens to you or someone on your team, and the only reason why I wasn't there is because there's not enough spaces on K2 to put tents. And so that's like, it's so steep that there wasn't enough tents. So I said, I'll go a day ahead because I was already trained from Everest. And so I was acclimatized more than the rest of the team. Had I not gone a day ahead, I would have been where that person was. So instead of climbing in 2021, I buried a teammate, which like, it's hard to even still put my head around like how all that happened. But it was not the experience I signed up for. And it was a rough year in 2021 because normally the Nepalese Sherpa handle the big mountains. The Nepalese were not invited into Pakistan that year. And Pakistan could keep the Nepalese out that year because of COVID. And since the Nepalese didn't have access to COVID vaccines, they weren't allowed in to climb. And there's a big controversy on like who's the better climbers, the Pakistani or the Nepalese, because both of those countries hold 8,000 meter peaks, of which there's only 14 of them in the world. And the reality is that the Nepalese are stronger climbers because their climbing season's 10 months. And the Pakistanis only have a 3-month climbing season. So it's just harder for them to get the reps in to be as strong and know how to handle the mountains. And it's culturally very different. The Nepalese are very Hindu, Buddhist, everybody's life matters. And in Pakistan, it's very Muslim based. And so they just don't, they're not moving worms to make sure that a worm doesn't get killed building a monastery, right? That's just different. And so when we were coming down the mountain, the Pakistanis, this guy named Rick passed away from England. They're like, we're just going to leave him. I'm like, no, we're not. We're going to bury this human. They're like, no, no, no. Like the birds are going to come eat them and then it'll like return back to the cycle of life. And that's how it works. I'm like, no, we're not. Like, that's not what we do. He's not from your culture. So we're not using your cultural burial system. We're going to use his cultural burial system. And this is what we're going to do. So like, it was like this just, I mean, you go into this mode of like, no, this is what we're doing. And so we had to grab a tent and I had to like wrap them up. And then I had to like convince people to move rocks so that we could get them deep enough. And then you had to put the rocks on top. And then everybody's like, okay, we're done. I'm like, no, not. Like, we're going to have a ceremony here or say something and, you know, that kind of stuff. So it was very much just different, right? Like in understanding you have to respect their culture and honor yours and how do you merge those? And it was a unique experience. I go home, I land in LAX, and it was a bad time to be in Pakistan because Pakistan borders Afghanistan. Afghanistan is 2021 is when the United States pulled out of Afghanistan. So we were losing cities by the day. And I look like this in Pakistan, even if you hide, like you still have blue eyes. And I had to be police escorted out of the country because they thought I was going to be kidnapped. And like, it was crazy. What's crazier is like, you have to go back, right? Like this is the mountain I need to climb. I need to go back. I need to tell my kids that I'm going back. So we had this big discussion of what happened, why it happened, what I'm going to do differently so it's safe for me to go back. That's when I took the kids climbing and doing some different experiences so they could see what I was really doing. I had no desire to go back. You know, when you have a bad experience somewhere, you kind of just want to leave that there and not open that wound. I had to go back. And luckily for me, a female had called me about 2 weeks before it was time for me to go back. And she had been training, but didn't have the resources to climb. And so I'm like, I'll help you. I'll put you on my team. We'll figure it out. I need something that's bigger than me. This is exactly what I need. So thank you for showing up. And so then when we went back in 2022, entirely different experience. Sherpa were there. There's big mountains take big teams. So we had enough people to run the ropes and run the oxygen and run all the things that the year before we weren't. And on July 22, I became the third American female to stand on top of K2. And then 30 minutes later, the first Pakistani female stood on top of her country's prize peak. The first Muslim female stood on top of one of these massive mountains and showed little girls globally that somebody looks like them and is in an environment like this. And for me, that's the biggest win of this entire pursuit, because when you can plant the seed of curiosity, possibility is born.
Incredible.
Yeah.
I love this mindset that you have, and you say there's no glory in staying stuck at base camp. So I don't think you mean literally base camp. What do you mean? What do you mean by that? There's no glory in staying stuck at base camp.
You know, like there's no glory in standing on top of a mountain by yourself either. Right? Like, I think we forget that this whole experience of life is collaborative. And what can we do in our pursuits that get us excited, that help others in theirs? And staying stuck or doing the thing that isn't, you have to lean into what's comfortable. You have to push boundaries. You have to, because if you don't, it's shrinking in on you and your life gets smaller and smaller. And if you can keep leaning into the discomfort and to the options and to the things that show up, things you never even imagined come on your door and you get to be a part of and share that story further. Like, success is empty. Significance is what fulfills us. And we have significance when we help others.
You wrote an incredible book called Break Proof. And it's all about strategies to build resiliency. And I think some people mistakenly think resiliency is just a DNA thing. But resiliency can be built. Talk to us a little bit about kind of your relationship with resiliency and what prompted you to write the book and the strategies that you detail in the book?
Yeah, like I think our natural default of resiliency in the beginning is that white knuckle, go harder, push more, like what can you do? And then when you start training for big mountains, you realize that recovery is just as significant as that push day, even though that push day feels amazing, right? Like like it's awesome to leave everything on the court and have nothing left to give, but you can't do that all the time. And so what does a recovery day look like? And I got injured, and one of my before I was leaving for a climb, we're like, okay, we're going to see how you're going to do. And then so my training was dialed way back. It was one of the best climbs I had because my body was in position to be able to absorb everything that happened. It wasn't running on like close to empty. And then probably the other biggest thing I learned from climbing is big mountains take big teams. Like, I don't know why I thought like I had to do it alone or figure it out, or this was my story, and so it's me that's going to go against the world. Like, that's exhausting and tiring, and you don't have the energy to get to the top. And then when you do, you don't even enjoy it because you gave everything away along the way. And so when you learn that big mountains take big teams and that resilience is built with those around you, you just achieve so much more and actually enjoy the entire pursuit.
I've heard you also talk about how important preparation is. And I think especially in business, in sports, I think preparation is understood, and practice and putting in the reps and doing all the right things are understood. But in business, I don't know. I think somehow we've forgotten how important preparation is, and practice, and being ready for the occasion. Talk to us about why you think preparation is so important. And I've got to believe it's also a reason why you built. So if anyone doesn't know, Jenn built an 8-figure business. So not many people, not many entrepreneurs build even a 7-figure business. But to build an 8-figure business, preparation is key. So whether you're climbing mountains or building a business or, running a family with 7 kids, talk to us a little bit about the importance of preparation.
Yeah, like here's what happens with preparation. Preparation allows you to get dialed into whatever you desire. So we're going to bring up my business. My business is investment services. And I had this idea that we were going to be this building that had my name on the side of it, and like a receptionist and plants and like all the things, right? Like that was my vision. And I was like so focused on that, and that I forgot about sales for a little bit and almost like freaked out when a color copy bill came in and I told nobody was allowed to print anything in color anymore for a while because I was like, oh, wow. And it was this big wake up call. And the crazy thing is like my business model didn't even go in that direction. I had a client that was the CEO of a credit union. The credit union was going to get into the investment service industry because the laws changed so they could get involved, not just banks anymore. And so I ended up meeting with the CEO of a credit union. She was my client. She's like, yeah, why don't you come in? We're interviewing advisors right now. We would definitely put you in the lineup to interview. And so I interviewed with her board and they gave me the contract. And so now my business model was to white label an investment platform for a credit union because they didn't want Jenn Drummond's name blasted in their credit union. They wanted their name. So like U of M Wealth Management, University of Michigan's my biggest client to this day. And so we label the program U of M. They give me office space. I do a revenue sharing agreement with them. So I put a rep in there. We do all the compliance behind the scenes, and we share that compliance office with Kellogg baby food and Gerber baby food and Kellogg cereal and these different companies. And the thing is like that opportunity came up because I was so dialed in and prepared for the other that when the door opened, I could see the opportunity. Where if I hadn't been like so dialed and figured this thing out, I would have still like been in meetings trying to figure out how to get this thing to go. And I was past that. Like I had that thing figured out. So then when like I saw like a glimpse of something, it was like, oh, let's go down that path. We can, because this one's so concrete. I have the space to explore this other idea. And so I think a lot of us, like when you prepare, even if it doesn't end up looking the way you think it does, that preparation gave you the bandwidth to notice something, to take advantage of, and to let it look different.
Such good advice. All right, last question for me, because we've got people lined up anxious to ask you questions. You've had a lot of big wins. Like you're standing on the top of the world. That's a big win.
Yes.
But you also talk about the power of small wins. Why are small wins so important? Because I think we see kind of typically those big wins, and that's what we celebrate.
Yeah. You know, this is probably best demonstrated this weekend at my daughter's volleyball game, but I'll also bring it to the mountain. My daughters were playing volleyball this weekend. If they won a point, they clapped it off and did a celebration to get ready for the next one. If they lost a point, they did the exact same thing. And the reason why they did the exact same thing is because the past has already happened. They need to be prepared for the future. Who cares what the last point was? We're going to treat it the same whether we won or lost. And when you have that energy of we're going to win, we're going to win, we're going to win, it's a lot easier to keep winning than it is of like, oh my God, we just lost that point. This is so bad, blah, 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 blah. Like you have to get back to even, and then you have to get ahead. Right. And when you can learn how to like always be even, it's so much easier to get ahead than trying to dig out. And when you do these big pursuits like climbing, you have so long until you get to the top of that mountain, like days. And sometimes you're on this mountain for weeks. And if you only celebrate at the top, you miss the whole point of the pursuit, because who you become is the reason why you even took that thing on. And so you need to celebrate these little moments that you notice who you became. And here's the thing, like when we had to cross these ladders, which are super scary and intimidating, those ladders, like your nervous system gets amped. When you celebrate and you cross that ladder, that trains your nervous system that this is a good thing. We can use this feeling for our benefit. And when it shows up in another environment, having a difficult conversation, jumping on stage or doing whatever, you're in a position to metabolize that and bring it forward.
So good. No wonder you're such a good keynote speaker. Oh my God. All right. Are you ready for some questions?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. Alex Smith in Florida. You're up with Jenn.
Jenn, I'm like floored over here with this story. Like a person that would just decide to climb the second sevens, and all this is mind-boggling to me. I guess it leads into my question. Like, I know there must have been so many times in this pursuit that you're like, you know, I've already gotten Everest. I've already done amazing things. What's the point of going all the way? Maybe it's not worth it. Or even like when you see someone die, you know, maybe is this really, you know, worth it all? I guess in those moments, like, can you give some stories about how you silence? Because, you know, on the previous call, last week, we were talking to Chad Sanchagrin, who was talking about silencing that critic in your head that wants to keep you safe. I'm just curious, like, what worked for you when I'm sure you had dozens, if not hundreds of times where you're like, I've done enough and I don't need to continue.
Oh yeah. I mean, like a lot to say the least. And here's the thing, whenever I'm in that spot where it's like, I want to turn around, that means I'm listening, right? That means like my brain is telling me a story and I'm listening. And if that listening is causing me to like stop or panic or whatever, that's my cue to start talking and talk myself into who I am, right? I'm out here, I'm showing women what's possible. I'm showing my kids that they can do whatever they desire. Like if I start getting that doubt too strong, I'm listening for too long. And I need to change the tide, and I change the tide by talking to myself and giving myself what I need to get to the top.
Good stuff. All right. I would not know Jenn Drummond if it were not for this person. Melissa Cohen is the one who introduced us. So Melissa in New York, you are up.
Oh, that's amazing. Thank you. Hi, Jenn. It is really good to see you. So, you know, I'm constantly in awe of you and all your accomplishments. And you've accomplished more than most of us would ever accomplish in their lifetime. And I'm like, one question I have is there a big what's next for you? Like, is there another huge challenge that you have that you're thinking about?
Yeah, great question. I've been like really low key on this one. I am in the process of climbing all the highest summits, which is why Denali's on my list. And I'll have one more climb after that. And then I'll have another world record as the only woman to do the first and the seconds in the world. And then I'm done with mountains. If I had to be totally honest, I want a different experience. When you face death, you realize life isn't forever. And there's just other things I'd rather hang my shingle on than just mountains. So what that looks like exactly, I don't know. I have kids going to college, which makes me super sad. And so we'll see, but definitely things that keep me a little bit closer to home.
Amazing. Thank you.
Thank you.
Colonel Heathman, you're up.
Thank you, Scott. Jenn, it is really wonderful to hear your story. I'm very curious, just in your life overall, is there something that just still kind of gives you hesitancy? You know, I don't want to just call it a fear because there's a lot of emotions tied to these things in our lives, but I'm just curious if there's something still out there that kind of nags at you, and how are you leaning into it?
You know, for me, it is less of a like physical feat, and it's more of an emotional acceptance of we have work to do. Like in the United States, we're very blessed and gifted with the opportunities that we have. Those are not globally recognized or available. And so for me, it's like, I know for a fact that I'm here so that other people can see what's possible for themselves. And so just getting out and like our presence matters. When you show up in a room, even if you're not talking, like your energy comes into that room and it shifts things. And so for me, it's very much traveling to different places and just sitting with people and seeing them and acknowledging them and letting them feel power and opportunity and inspiration. And not saying I'm like this egotistical, amazing human or whatever, but I do think once you've done something, like I know when my little girls' friends come over and they're like, "You're the mom that climbed Everest?" I'm like, "I am." And I'll go take them on a walk and they'll be like, "I walked with this mom that climbed Everest," right? Like, I don't care where it comes from. Like, if that helps you get to wherever your finish line is, like, we'll walk all day long, girl. Like, I'm here for it. So for me, it's very much, okay, I did this thing. How do I use it to serve so that others have the courage to do theirs?
Yeah, it's incredible. Thank you, Jenn.
Yeah, no, thank you.
You know, Jenn, sometimes when you accomplish these huge things, I see this a lot in the military. I also see it in athletics. Is people have a tendency, their identity is tied to, you know, Jenn Drummond, world record mountaineer, and you're still so young. Is it scary for you to put that behind you and jump into other passions?
No, it's actually awesome, right? Like it's like being a beginner new. Diana Nyad just spoke at a event that I was at, and you know her big thing was the swim, and she's like, "That is not going to be the last thing I do. Like that's no way going to define me." And I freaking love that about her, right? And I feel the same way. It's like, hey, this was one thing that I got to channel my energy towards, and I'm grateful for the experience. It is like this much of who I am. And I really want to keep exploring just different things because life is in the experience of who you are doing these things, not necessarily in the achievement.
What advice do you give people, though? Most people never start to do audacious things in their life because they don't want to be a beginner. They don't want to look incompetent. And then there's people like you, which are very rare, that lean into that. But that's not the norm. So what do you say to those people that they're afraid to have that beginner experience.
Yeah, I mean, I think you need to lean into what that looks like for you that gives you the comfortable entry point, right? Like maybe that's going to a yoga class in a new city so nobody knows you. Maybe that's learning how to cook something. Like it has to be something that's not comfortable for you, that's a low enough stakes environment that you train your nervous system to do this thing. Because I think it's really our nervous systems that keep us from doing something. They get so ramped up, we write a story and we keep ourselves stuck. So is there a way that you can do something that helps you nip that story? Because once you nip it there, you're going to be able to nip it in other places and just build from that momentum. So if you're stuck, you know, there's this guy named Vin who's a speaker. He's fabulous. And he did this exercise where he had everybody stand up and he's like, I want you to change 36 things about yourself. And nobody could do it. So then he sat everybody down. He's like, okay, everybody stand up, change one thing. They put their hair in a ponytail, they put on a belt, they do whatever. Sit down, do one thing. Everybody could do one thing. And so he's like, that's what overwhelm feels like. You don't know what to do. You're stuck. You're stopped. But if I asked you to do one thing 36 times, you'd be able to come up with that thing. So if somebody has this feeling of like, I don't even know where to go. This is overwhelming. I don't want to whatever. Okay, you're looking too big. What's the smallest thing you could do? Eat with a different hand. Go drive a different way to work. Go to a different yoga class. Just do little things because that strengthens that muscle to continue doing bigger things.
No, and it's so true. And stacking those small wins, you know, leads to giant improvements, you know, whether it's health and wellness and you start hydrating a little bit better, and then you start sleeping a little bit better, and you start, you know, moving your body a little bit more, and you start, you know, dialing in your nutrition a little bit. And all of a sudden, like those little, what look like micro moments, you know, lead to tremendous results.
Definitely.
How do you, I think consistency and discipline, are they easy? Are those things easy for you, or are they things you need to work at?
It got easy for me when I allowed it to look different than what I thought it should look like. Okay. So for example, at first it was like, you need to do this training for 4 hours and this is what you need to do. I'm like, okay, well, I don't have that window. And so instead of putting a 0 on the board, I'd be like, okay, well, I'm just going to put an hour in, or I'm going to do an hour here and an hour there and an hour there. So I'd get 3 hours today instead of 4, and maybe not in one block, but in like little increments. And so for me, like just not putting a 0 on the board, like opened up so many doors. And I know that sounds so silly, but it is something that simple worked for me. No zeros. And then it was like, okay, well, I can't do this training like they laid it out. What can I do? Okay, I can bring a step to soccer practice with water bottles, and I can go up and down on that step and watch my kid play practice and get at least an hour and a half going up and down. It's better than sitting and doing a 0. And so you just really start getting creative, and you realize, like, you know, you have these ideal plans. Perfect. If you can go like 80% of those plans, you're still going to get to the top of the mountain. It's the problem is when someone's like, oh, it doesn't look like that, so I'm not going to do it. Never mind, I got a goose egg today. Anything times a goose egg is a goose egg.
No 0 days is so important. I was talking to the group last week, and I said, I think this is a good business idea. So I want somebody to steal it. You know, when you're really getting at it physically, and you're training for something, and then you get an injury. And what happens for most people is they go from 60 miles an hour to like a screeching freaking halt. And instead of saying like, okay, my shoulders, what can I do around that so that I don't have that 0 day? So I want somebody to create like an app where you go, my knee is screwed up, my Achilles, my this, my that, and the stuff you can do. Because I think it's just human nature that we kind of, or we can be like all or nothing. And those 80% add up to big, big wins versus, you know, a 0, putting a big goose egg on the board.
Definitely.
Who else has a question for? We've got 10 minutes left.
I don't have a question, but I'm just going to comment. How are you, friend?
Hi, friend.
You just inspire the crap out of us. And thank you so much for coming and giving us this take on your story. I've heard your story so many times and it never gets old, but I really loved hearing about the kids. I loved your journey and it was just awesome. So thank you for inspiring us on these small moments because they really do matter.
No, they do. It's all these little moments that add up. Yeah. And it's funny because every mountain had a different challenge. And some of them were emotional, some of them were mental, some of them were physical. Denali's going to be a challenge. I have an injured shoulder right now. So like what Scott was just saying, I'm not using my normal workout, but I'm still walking. I'm still using a weighted vest because it's not using my shoulder in a direction that would hurt it. And I know like I did stem cells the other day. I'm hoping that works. If it doesn't matter. We'll still be able to like work around it. And just allowing it to be messy. And I did a podcast the other day and we were talking about like the messy middle and about how most of us get in that messy middle. And it's like, okay, I don't see where I'm going. I'm not at the safe zone anymore. This is exhausting. But truly, when we look back on our lives, those messy moments are like where the magic happens. It's where we learned about ourselves and we figured it out and we organized it and we put the puzzle together. And if it didn't have that messy moment, we wouldn't really be excited about the pursuit because it'd be too boring. Right. And so like whenever times get hard, I'm like, well, at least it's not boring. At least my life's not boring, you know, and just like having those little one-liners. And I think I'm at Heather's house. I think all of you guys have probably seen this like viral clip that she just had of these movies, mind movies. I'm a huge proponent of visualization and understanding like what it is. But here, when I climbed Everest, 40% of the people didn't summit. And of the 40% that didn't summit, 90% were mental. And the reason why is because their goal was to summit Everest. They never made a movie of what happened after the success. Right. And so they didn't know who that person was going to be. And that was like sabotaging their efforts. So when you're making like these visualizations in your movie, make sure that you're getting past the company being sold and this different thing and like building that story on the other side, because that's going to get you through that peak and it's going to get you to that other side. And so what is that visually? What does that feel like? What does that taste like? What does that look like? Who's with you? And what are you doing today to make sure that those relationships and those things stay steady during that entire pursuit to the other side?
What do you do from a tactical standpoint to do that, like steps to do that?
Okay, so I will take, I think women, we're lucky like this. We are a little bit more crafty and we will take pictures of things. And so I'll take pictures on Canva, and I don't know how to build any of this, but my assistant does. And I will put like my favorite music with it. And then she'll make like a slideshow of my music or like little quotes on there of like, I am this, or I am that, or I want this. And it'll have a picture of a beach house or a mountain house or whatever. And then I'll watch that. And I'll watch that every single day. And I'll watch it and it's like a 2-minute video that I made custom for my life of things that I want to do and achieve. And it has my music that gets me excited and hyped up. And that works for me.
It's so powerful. Yeah, we all can do that or a variation of it. And I think it's just something that a lot of people just don't put the effort in to do.
Yeah. And I just like, because here's what happens. It's scientifically proven that once you build this thing, your reticular activated system, right? Like your brain is scanning 1,000 things at a time and it's going to pick up 50. Since you've planted the seed of what you want it to scan, now it's going to start picking up those things that are going to lead you on that path and bring it into fruition. So for me, what's like these little movies are like priming my brain to scan the environment to give me the opportunity to get to the top of whatever mountain I'm pursuing.
And I mean, I know the answer to this, but in all of your experience climbing, the most iconic mountains in the world, mostly mental fitness got you to the top, or physical?
Oh, yeah. Mental. Because that mental game, like every step's intentional. Every step is on purpose. Every step has to be chosen. And that's the thing. You have to choose every step. Like people think like, oh, I'm going to like set this thing and then it's going to get easy. No, every step matters. And you have to pick every step and be intentional about it. Because if you don't make that step forward, your brain's going to start telling you why you don't need to make it.
So everyone needs to pick up Break Proof. Who is it written for specifically?
Honestly, it was written for me before I did the accident. And it's just a reminder of like, hey, we're all here with this mission. Mountains are exciting to me. My mom likes to decorate bookshelves. Everything's perfect. And that's great. And understanding like, okay, if that's your thing and don't negotiate with yourself. Don't sell yourself short or be like, oh, I was dreaming big and that's too big. I didn't really want to do that. Yes, you did. So like, who can you put on your team to make it happen? And can you extend, like, I thought for some reason this goal was going to take me 2 years. It took me 4.5, which other people are like, that's amazing still. Like if it took twice as long to do the thing you want to do, is it still a win? 99% of the time it is. So can you extend that pursuit and enjoy it more? I just did Aconcagua in 5 days. It's a 21-day climb. It was a horrible experience. My grandma passed away, so I wanted to get back for a funeral. So I had unique circumstances, but it was one of those examples of like, just because you can doesn't mean you should. If I would have had 21 days, my experience on that mountain would have been entirely different and in a good way. Right? Like I'm glad I got it done and I don't have to go back. But like, how many times are we doing that in our own lives? Like race to what? Right? Like let it take its time and enjoy the process and just experience it versus like having to force it into fruition so often.
Oh, Jenn, thank you for being such an incredible inspiration to all of us. And if you ever get a chance to hear her speak, or obviously book, listen to podcasts, but I think the exciting thing, Jenn, is like, this is just the beginning for you.
Yes.
Like,
yeah,
you've accomplished so many huge things, but you have so many exciting things ahead of you that it's going to be super fun. And, you know, I felt that way about Heather too, you know, years ago when we got to know each other, probably like 8-9 years ago. I'm like, man, I think the road ahead for her is going to be so interesting. And I don't know that she even, you know, dreamed of some of these things that have come to fruition, but I feel the same way about you. And it's cool. It's cool to hang out with, see what you can become. Very
awesome.
cool.
Well, I'm so grateful for everybody in this room and like the time today and everything. It's just fun to see all the ways we can do life and all the ways that people show up and contribute and inspire each other. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Jenn. We appreciate you. We will be cheering you on. When is Denali?
I leave May 16.
All right. Put it on your calendars. We'll be watching you. Instagram, best place to follow along.
Perfect. Yeah, definitely.
Awesome. Jenn, thank you so much.
Thank you, guys. Take care. Have a good day.